Dave Roberts did not raise his voice when he walked to the microphone. That was the first thing people noticed. Because what had just happened inside that stadium, what had unfolded in the 10th inning in a way that nobody in that press room had ever seen before, should have produced a man who was barely holding himself together. A man whose words were sharp and fast and full of the kind of controlled fury that comes after something crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. Instead, Roberts sat down slowly. He placed both hands on the table. He looked at the room for a moment before he said anything at all. And then he spoke. What happened tonight was unacceptable. I will not dress it up. I will not find softer words for it. What those two players did was unacceptable. And the consequences will reflect that. The room did not move. Because Dave Roberts had just said, in the quietest possible voice, something that would echo through this sport for a very long time. This is that story. To understand what the 10th inning became, you have to understand what the 9 innings before it were. This was not a meaningless game between two teams with nothing at stake. The Dodgers arrived in Colorado carrying the weight of a team that knows every game in this division costs something. The Rockies arrived as a team that plays with the particular desperation of a club that has been counted out so many times they have stopped waiting for people to count them back in. That combination produces a certain kind of baseball. Tight. Physical in the way baseball can be physical without ever crossing into something else. Hard slides. Pitches that live on the inner half. Stares that linger a beat longer than they need to. The kind of game where the temperature rises slowly, degree by degree, until you realize somewhere around the 7th inning that the air inside the stadium feels different from when the first pitch was thrown. Ohtani had been everywhere in this game. Not on the mound tonight. Tonight he was the designated hitter, the presence in the lineup that the Rockies pitching staff had to account for from the first inning to the last. He had gone 2 for 4 with a double that rattled the left field wall in the 4th inning and a walk that loaded the bases in the 7th before the inning ended without a run scoring. He had been the story of the game the way he is always the story. Not because he demands it. Because the game keeps finding him. And then the 10th inning arrived. Baseball has a geography. The dugout is supposed to be sanctuary. It is where the game breathes between half innings. Where players sit and watch and prepare and exist in the particular stillness that professional athletes find even in the middle of chaos. It is not where this happens. The details emerged in pieces, the way details always emerge when something happens faster than the people witnessing it can fully process. What the cameras caught, what the witnesses described, what the statements later confirmed, assembled themselves into a picture that became clearer and more disturbing the more complete it became. 2 Rockies players had crossed into territory that the dugout is not supposed to be. The exact sequence began near the tunnel entrance, in the space between where one team's dugout ends and the walkway that leads back toward the clubhouse. Ohtani had moved in that direction after a play at the plate ended the top of the 10th. He was not looking for a confrontation. There was no reason for him to be looking for one. The game was still alive. The Dodgers were still in it. He was moving through the ordinary geography of a baseball game. And then it wasn't ordinary anymore. 2 Rockies players, whose names were already being confirmed by multiple sources before Roberts even reached the microphone, moved toward him in a way that was not accidental. In a way that was not a collision of bodies in the confusion of a crowded space. In a way that left no ambiguity about intent. What followed was not a baseball play. It was not a hard foul. It was not a collision at a base. It was not the kind of physical contact that the sport sometimes produces in the heat of competition and absorbs into its history as just another moment of intensity. It was an attack. In a dugout. On Shohei Ohtani. The brawl that erupted after that was immediate. Both benches emptied in the way both benches empty when something crosses the line that every player on a roster understands without needing it explained to them. The line that says this is no longer about baseball. The line that says we are no longer playing a game right now. Players poured from the dugouts. Bodies moved toward bodies. The noise inside the stadium shifted from the noise of a crowd watching a game to something rawer and louder and harder to describe. It lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds before order was restored. 4 minutes and 20 seconds is a very long time when something like this is happening. When the benches finally cleared and the umpires had done what umpires do in moments like this, the stadium settled into a silence that was not peaceful. It was the silence of thousands of people trying to process what they had just seen. On the field, several Dodgers players stood in a loose cluster near the first base line. Not talking. Just standing. The way people stand when they are still running through something in their minds and haven't yet decided what to do with it. Freddie Freeman was one of them. His expression was not the expression of a man who had just been in a baseball game. It was the expression of a man who had just seen something happen to a teammate that he was still deciding how to carry. Mookie Betts stood a few feet away from Freeman. He had his arms crossed. He was looking at the ground. Neither of them spoke to each other for a long time. Inside the Dodgers clubhouse, the atmosphere was the kind of atmosphere that a room gets when the people inside it are running on adrenaline and anger and the particular protectiveness that a team develops over a long season. The feeling that whatever happens to one of us happens to all of us. Ohtani was evaluated by the Dodgers medical staff. The team did not immediately release details about his condition. That absence of information, in the minutes following the brawl, produced its own kind of tension. Because when the player involved is Shohei Ohtani, and the information being withheld is about whether he is physically okay, the imagination of everyone watching fills that silence with its worst possibilities. The Dodgers understood this. They moved quickly to confirm that he was being evaluated. That he was with the medical staff. That more information would follow. But in that space between the brawl ending and the information arriving, the weight of what had just happened settled over the stadium like something physical. He did not look like a man who had just managed 10 innings of baseball. He looked like a man who had managed 10 innings of baseball and then watched 2 members of the opposing team do something to his player that he was still, even now, working to find the right words for. Roberts sat down. He placed both hands flat on the table. The room was fuller than a normal post-game press conference. Word had traveled fast. People had moved quickly to be in this room before he started speaking. He looked at the assembled reporters for a moment. He seemed to be deciding something about how to begin. And then he began. What happened tonight was unacceptable. He didn't rush past those words. He let them sit in the room for a moment before he continued. I will not dress it up. I will not find softer words for it. What those 2 players did was unacceptable. And the consequences will reflect that. A reporter asked him immediately about Ohtani's condition. Roberts nodded before the question was fully finished. He had been expecting it. He had his answer ready. Shohei is being evaluated. I am not going to stand here and tell you something I don't have complete information on yet. What I will tell you is that we are taking every precaution. His health is the only thing that matters right now. He paused. The scoreboard is secondary. Everything is secondary. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when the person at the microphone is saying something that everyone understands matters. Another reporter asked him about the 2 Rockies players specifically. About whether he had spoken to anyone from the league. About what he expected the consequences to look like. Roberts' voice stayed level. But something behind it tightened. I have been in this game for a long time. I have seen hard plays. I have seen tensions boil over. I have seen brawls. Baseball is a physical and emotional sport and sometimes it goes places none of us want it to go. He stopped for a moment. But what I saw tonight was not that. What I saw tonight was something different. And I expect the league to treat it as something different. He didn't raise his voice on that last sentence. He didn't need to. The quietness of it carried more weight than volume would have. The game finished. The Dodgers won in 10 innings, though by the time the final out was recorded, the score felt like the least important piece of information produced by this night. What mattered was what the league would do next. What the consequences Roberts spoke about so carefully would look like when they arrived. Whether Ohtani would be available for the next series. Whether the two Rockies players would face something proportional to what they had done. In the hours after the game, as the statements and the social media responses and the voices of former players began to fill the space that this incident had torn open, one thing became clear. This was not going to be absorbed quietly into the history of the season. This was not going to be a footnote. It was going to be a moment that the sport had to look at directly and decide what it meant and what it required in response. Freeman was asked one final question as he was leaving the clubhouse. A reporter caught him near the exit, his bag over his shoulder, his face still carrying the weight of the evening. "What do you want people to understand about tonight?" Freeman stopped walking. He thought about it for a moment that felt longer than it probably was. "That you don't do that. You just don't do that." He walked out. The hallway behind him was empty. And somewhere on the other side of the building, Shohei Ohtani was still being evaluated. The Dodgers were still waiting for information. And the sport of baseball was about to have a very serious conversation with itself.